What happens when America's most talked about former royal sits across from one of television's most trusted journalists? At first glance, it feels like any polished morning segment. Warm smiles, polite small talk, and the familiar CBS glow of orange and blue. But beneath the calm surface, tension waits to ignite. Each question sharpens the air. Each reply cuts deeper. By the time the exchange derails, viewers are left wondering if they've just witnessed one of the most dramatic confrontations in morning show history. The studio hummed with its usual rhythm. Crew members moved like shadows. Cameras glided into place, and the backdrop glowed with the comforting palette millions associate with their morning coffee. Gayle King sat poised, notes neatly arranged, her calm voice steady as the anchor of the broadcast. Across from her, Meghan Markle, navy blazer, cream blouse, hair in soft waves, looked every bit the polished guest ready to promote her latest cause. "Meghan, thank you for being here this morning," Gayle began warmly. "I know you've been working on a new initiative, and our viewers are eager to hear more." Meghan's smile was perfect, practiced. "It's always a pleasure, Gayle. This initiative is about raising global awareness for issues often ignored. It's about using my platform to shine a light on what truly matters." At first, everything unfolded exactly as the producers had planned. Uplifting, hopeful, safe. But Gayle's eyes sharpened as she leaned slightly forward, pivoting with her signature precision. "You've spoken often about your personal truth," she said evenly, "but some question the consistency of your story. For instance, you once told Oprah you and Harry held a private wedding ceremony before the official one, yet the Archbishop later denied it. How do you reconcile that difference?" The shift was immediate. Meghan's smile flickered. Adjusting her sleeve, she answered coolly, "It's interesting how people cling to technicalities instead of acknowledging the emotional truth. What Harry and I experienced was sacred to us. Whether others choose to nitpick doesn't change our reality." Gayle nodded, measured but firm. "I hear you. Still, some might argue truth should be universal, not just personal, especially when it's shared publicly." Meghan gave a short, dismissive laugh. "With all due respect, Gayle, you weren't there. Neither was the Archbishop in every private moment of our lives. It's easy to speculate from the outside. You didn't live it." The studio air thickened. Pleasantries were slipping away. Gayle pressed on. "You've also said you received no media training before entering royal life. Yet palace insiders claim you were thoroughly briefed. Would you say they're lying?" Meghan's expression hardened. "Palace insiders?" she repeated with disdain. "Anonymous voices who've built careers protecting a crumbling institution. Forgive me if I don't validate their narratives. I lived it. I know the truth." Her words carried a sharp edge, dismissive and defiant. Each answer pushed Gayle's questions aside, as if swatting away an annoyance. Gayle inhaled slowly, her face composed, but the tension in the room was undeniable. Years of live television had taught Gayle King the art of patience, how to stay composed when the heat rose, how to keep calm under fire. But even she felt the first sparks of tension flicker inside. A glance at the studio clock reminded her there were still segments to fill. Quietly, she wondered if this interview was about to spiral far beyond what the producers had envisioned. The audience sensed it too. The polite applause from earlier had vanished, replaced by a hush that felt heavy, expectant. Later, viewers at home would describe it as a moment you could feel in your chest, the atmosphere tightening as though something was about to snap. Gayle steadied herself, her pen gliding across her notes. She had more questions, important ones. Across from her, Meghan leaned back, chin raised just enough to signal defiance. Her posture dared Gayle to press further. The calm before the storm was gone. The storm itself had begun. The light seemed hotter, though maybe it was just the weight of the room. Meghan sat with her fingers laced delicately in her lap, her composure regal, her gaze unflinching. Gayle maintained her trademark warmth, but there was steel beneath it now. This was no longer about philanthropy. It had become a test of endurance, and Gayle was determined not to lose ground. So, Meghan, Gayle began softly, her tone careful. In your Oprah interview, you described feeling isolated during your pregnancy, even denied mental health support. Yet former palace staff insist those resources were available. How do you respond to that? Meghan's eyes hardened, though her lips curved into a faint smile, the kind reserved for subordinates. Gayle, it's very easy for outsiders to rewrite history. People love to pretend they know what happened behind closed doors. The truth is, I was the one left to suffer. If others claim differently, perhaps they're more invested in protecting the monarchy than telling the truth. Her tone was honeyed but laced with venom. No humility, only condescension. Gayle nodded politely but pressed again. I understand. Still, wouldn't you agree that when multiple accounts exist, people are going to question the accuracy of your version? They'll want consistency. Meghan laughed sharply, almost theatrically. Consistency, Gayle? The only thing consistent has been the smear campaign against me. Lies, distortions, half-truths. This has been my reality for years. And the idea that I should dignify anonymous sources with an explanation? Laughable. Perhaps they should reflect on their own failures instead of whispering to the press. A stir ran through the audience. This was no polished PR performance. Meghan's voice dripped with disdain, as if accountability itself were beneath her. Gayle inhaled, steadying herself. She shuffled her note cards slowly, giving herself a beat before pushing forward. All right, she said, firmer now. Let's pivot slightly. You've often said you stepped away from royal life in search of privacy. Yet since then, you've written books, filmed documentaries, and given multiple high-profile interviews. How do you reconcile the desire for privacy with such a public presence? Meghan's smile sharpened to ice. Gayle, privacy doesn't mean silence. It means control over what we choose to share. Refusing to be silenced doesn't mean forfeiting my right to privacy. Frankly, I find the question insulting. I don't need to justify my choices, least of all to critics who thrive on hypocrisy. Again, murmurs rippled through the studio. This was no longer a guest segment. It was a duel. Gayle tilted her head, still even. I'm not trying to be insulting, Meghan. I'm just trying to understand the balance you're describing. Meghan's reply was instant, cutting. Then perhaps you should try harder, Gayle, because implying that my husband and I don't deserve to tell our story is absurd. The fact that I even have to explain this proves how deep the bias still runs. Gasps broke from the crowd. The arrogance in Meghan's tone was no longer subtle. It was blazing. She wasn't answering. She was lecturing, towering over the questions, as if Gayle were the one on trial. For the first time, Gayle's eyes flickered, the smallest crack in her serene mask. She pressed her palms together, drawing a deep breath as the tension threatened to boil over. Her voice was even, but the steel underneath rang clear. I hear you, Meghan, but I think viewers want clarity. These aren't just criticisms from the palace. These are questions people genuinely have. Meghan leaned forward, posture regal, voice dripping with superiority. And maybe the public should stop expecting me to spoon-feed answers to every petty doubt. My life is not a public trial. I don't owe the palace, critics, or even viewers an explanation for my choices. The words landed with a heavy thud. Even Gayle faltered for a moment, taken aback by the audacity. In the control room, the question of whether to cut to commercial sparked briefly. But the producers knew better. They were watching lightning strike on live television. Gayle adjusted her glasses, her tone still calm, but with an edge now unmistakable. I respect that you feel you don't owe explanations, but when you make powerful statements that shape how millions perceive one of the world's oldest institutions, people will ask questions. That's not bias. That's journalism. Meghan tilted her head, lips curling into a smirk. And I respect that you think you're doing journalism, Gayle. But let's be honest. This isn't about truth. It's about entertainment. If it's spectacle you wanted, congratulations. You've got it, the audience gasped audibly. Silence fell, thick and electric. Gayle's expression remained outwardly composed, but her eyes flashed, betraying thinning patience. She had interviewed presidents, survivors, world leaders, yet never had she been condescended to so brazenly on her own set. Still, she steadied herself. "We're here for an honest conversation, Meghan." "That's all?" Meghan crossed her arms, smirk intact. "Then perhaps you should learn how to ask honest questions instead of parroting palace spin." The insult hung in the air like smoke. The studio audience shifted uncomfortably. Gayle's mask of calm was beginning to crack. The storm was swelling, and Meghan, blind to the growing unease, leaned further into her role as untouchable Duchess. What had begun as a careful exchange had become a duel. Gayle's questions, measured, professional, met with sharp, dismissive answers. Meghan's superiority oozed from every word. Gayle's patience stretched thinner with each exchange. She had questioned presidents who handled scrutiny with more grace. She had sat across from leaders who bristled but never sneered. Meghan's condescension stood in a league of its own. "So, Meghan," Gayle said softly, each word chosen with precision. "You've often spoken about wanting to focus on service. Could you share what service means to you now, outside the monarchy?" Meghan let out a quiet laugh, shaking her head as though the question were beneath her. "Gayle, I think it's obvious. Service is about impact, not titles. Something I've been trying to explain for years. The fact that people still ask me to define it shows how far behind society is." Her tone was cutting. Her body language closed off. She leaned back, arms folded, chin lifted high. Gayle nodded slowly, acknowledging, but not yielding. "I hear you. But some would say your books, documentaries, and interviews seem more focused on telling your personal story than serving others. How do you respond to that perception?" Meghan's smirk sharpened. "Perception is shaped by bias, Gayle. People determined to see me as self-serving will never recognize my work. Correcting their ignorance isn't my responsibility." Another stir from the audience. Her words weren't just sharp. They cut across the studio like lashes. Gayle's eyes flickered, but her tone stayed smooth. "I understand, Meghan. But let's talk specifics. Your new project. How does it differ from your past initiatives?" Meghan waved a hand, dismissive, as though brushing away a triviality. "It's not about being different. It's about building on the legacy I've already created. Honestly, I sometimes feel these questions are redundant. My record speaks for itself." A soft gasp rippled through the studio. Meghan hadn't just dismissed the question. She had dismissed Gayle herself. For a long second, Gayle simply stared at her guest, lips pressed together, patience hanging by a thread. Gayle drew a deliberate breath. She had been patient, professional, even empathetic. But Meghan's arrogance had crossed the line into outright disrespect. Still, she tried one last time to steady the tone. "Meghan, I think our viewers appreciate details. They want to understand not just what you're doing, but why. Can you share an example?" Meghan rolled her eyes, a subtle gesture, but enough for the cameras to catch. "And Gayle, with all due respect, I didn't come here to repeat bullet points like some press release. If people are truly interested, they can read about it on our website. I don't need to spoon-feed information." The audience gasped audibly this time. Gayle's hand tightened around her note cards, but her voice remained calm. "I see. Well, some might argue that when you appear on national television, the expectation is that you'll share those details with the public directly. That's part of accountability." Meghan leaned forward, eyes narrowing. "Accountability? I've been held accountable every single day of my life since I married into that family. If anything, I've been scrutinized far more than anyone else. So forgive me if I don't feel the need to bend over backwards to satisfy critics who will never support me anyway." The dismissiveness in her tone was like a spark in a room full of gasoline. Gayle sat up straighter, her professional mask beginning to crack. "Meghan," she said, her voice firmer now, "I'm not your critic. I'm doing my job. My viewers expect me to ask questions that matter. And frankly, your tone right now..." She stopped, choosing restraint. doesn't make it easy for people to see the sincerity of your message." Meghan laughed again, a cold, dismissive sound. "Maybe that's because sincerity makes people uncomfortable, Gayle. Maybe you and your viewers simply aren't ready for someone who refuses to play the game." The words sliced through the air like knives. The audience shifted restlessly, some sympathetic to Gayle, others stunned by Meghan's audacity. Slowly, deliberately, Gayle set her notes down on the desk. For the first time, she locked eyes with Meghan, letting a flash of irritation show. "Meghan, nobody's asking you to play a game. What they're asking for is respect. Respect for the questions. Respect for the audience. Respect for the platform you're using." Meghan smirked, her voice dripping with superiority. "And maybe, Gayle, respect should be mutual." The studio went dead silent. The tension was thick enough to cut with a knife. Gayle sat perfectly still, hands folded. But the fire in her eyes betrayed that the breaking point was near. She had tried patience. She had tried empathy. But Meghan's arrogance had become unbearable. The calm veneer of CBS Mornings was about to shatter. The storm that had been building since the first question was ready to break wide open, and everyone in the studio could feel it coming. The air was electric. Meghan sat with arms crossed, chin lifted as if she presided over the room, not as a guest. Gayle, her papers untouched, leaned forward, her tone stripped of gentleness. "Meghan," she said, voice low but firm, "you've made it very clear that you feel misunderstood, even attacked. But let me tell you something. Sitting here, the way you've spoken to me, to this audience, it doesn't come across as strength. It comes across as arrogance," the audience gasped. Meghan blinked rapidly, composure cracking. "Excuse me?" she shot back, voice sharp. Gayle didn't flinch. "You've dismissed every question I've asked. You've rolled your eyes. You've implied that the people watching at home are ignorant if they don't immediately agree with you. That's not the voice of a leader or a change-maker. That's the voice of a spoiled child who thinks the world owes her something." A shocked silence gripped the studio. Meghan's lips trembled. Her hand gripped the armrest. "How dare you?" she began, but Gayle cut her off, her patience finally gone. "No, Meghan. How dare you? How dare you come on this set, ask for a platform, and then insult the very people you claim to serve? How dare you paint yourself as a victim while dismissing every attempt at accountability as bias or conspiracy? You act as though the world is against you, when in truth the world has given you opportunities most can only dream of." Meghan's face flushed red, her eyes glistening. She tried to hold her posture, but Gayle's words hammered against the carefully built walls of her composure. "You talk about hating the monarchy," Gayle pressed on, her voice rising, "and yet you cling to the Duchess title every chance you get. You talk about service, but your projects are eclipsed by your own narrative. And let's be very clear, Meghan. If you were not married to Prince Harry, none of this would even exist." The audience gasped again, louder this time. Meghan's breath caught in her throat. Gayle stood now, her voice carrying the full authority of decades in journalism. "You act like you're still in the palace, as if the world owes you deference because you were once part of that family. But here's the truth. You're not in the palace anymore. You're not above accountability. And right now on this stage, you're not acting like a duchess. You're acting like a petulant little girl stamping her feet because she can't have her way." Meghan's eyes filled with tears. Her hand moved to her face as if to shield herself from the cameras. "You don't understand. I understand perfectly," Gayle cut in, her tone sharper now. "I understand that this isn't about racism or protocols or even mental health anymore. This is about jealousy. You wanted to be Kate. You wanted to be William. You wanted their respect, their popularity, their role. And when you realized you couldn't have it, you decided to burn the whole house down on your way out." Meghan let out a choked sob. The words landed with devastating weight, shattering her armor. She stood abruptly, her chair scraping across the studio floor. This is unacceptable," she stammered, tears streaming down her cheeks. "I don't have to take this." Gayle, standing firm, didn't flinch. "Then don't. If you can't handle being asked the questions everyone else is too afraid to ask, then maybe you shouldn't be sitting in that chair. Maybe you should stop pretending you want to serve others when it's clear you only want to serve yourself." Meghan grabbed her purse, shoulders shaking, and turned toward the exit. The cameras caught every trembling step, the tears glistening on her cheeks as she stormed off the set. The studio was silent, except for the echo of her heels on the polished floor. The moment the door closed behind her, the audience erupted into stunned whispers. Some looked at Gayle in admiration, others in shock, but no one could deny they had just witnessed television history. Gayle stood tall, her voice calm once more, as she turned to the cameras. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is live television. Sometimes the truth is uncomfortable, but it still matters." The director cut to commercial, but the legacy of that explosive exchange was already written. Meghan Markle had come to promote a project, but left in tears, her image bruised, her arrogance laid bare, and Gayle King, who had tried for so long to stay composed, had finally unleashed the words millions had wanted to say. What began as a routine interview ended as one of the most unforgettable clashes in broadcast history.